My fiancée said. I think I want to explore other options before settling down. I respected that and canceled everything quietly. Months later, she reached out after seeing me move on, but realized I didn't leave any door open. I think I want to explore other options before settling down. That's what she said. Not in a fight. Not at the end of a screaming match where things had finally cracked open. She said it calmly. Over a candlelit dinner in the West Village, with a glass of Malbec barely touched in front of her, and the kind of composed expression you practice in a mirror before you're ready to use it in public. I remember the exact second the words hit me. Not like a slap, more like a pressure shift. The kind that happens in a plane when it starts descending and you feel it in your ears before anything else. I set my fork down. I looked at her. Serafina, my fiancée, the woman whose name was currently embossed on 200 save-the-date cards in a box under my bed, was watching me with this strange, braced expression. Not guilty, not sad, just waiting, like she had loaded the gun and now needed to see what the shot would do. Options, I said. Just that one word. She nodded slowly, and I realized in that exact moment what she wasn't saying out loud. She wasn't saying she was confused. She wasn't saying she was scared of commitment. She was saying she had been looking at something else, and she wanted to walk toward it without me being the reason she couldn't. I didn't give her a fight. I didn't give her the scene she had prepared for. I picked my fork back up. I finished my lamb chops, and I never once let her see my hands shake. She expected noise. I gave her silence. And that silence, I didn't know it then, became the first wall of something she would never be able to get through again. We had been engaged for 7 months. The venue was booked, a restored brownstone event space in Brooklyn Heights that had a 6-month waiting list. The deposit had been paid. The caterer had been selected after 4 tastings. My mother had already bought her dress, a deep navy thing she had cried over in the fitting room, and called me from the parking lot to tell me about. Serafina had a Pinterest board with over 460 pins on it. I know, because she used to show me updates on Sunday mornings while we lay in bed, scrolling slowly through centerpiece arrangements and ceremony arch ideas with this quiet, contented look on her face. We had a joint savings account with just over $18,000 in it. We had a lease we were supposed to sign in 3 weeks, a 2-bedroom in Park Slope with exposed brick and a kitchen that finally had counter space. We had a future, assembled carefully, chosen deliberately, or so I thought. I didn't realize it then, but that dinner changed everything. Not just because of what she said, but because of what she expected to happen next. She expected tears. She expected bargaining. She expected me to say something like, "We can work through this," or "Tell me what you need," or, and this is the version I think she had counted on most, "Please don't do this." She had prepared for a fight. She had rehearsed her side of it. And I did the one thing she had never once factored into her calculation. I simply released her. Completely. Without conditions. Without leaving any door cracked. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 29 at the time. Serafina was 27. We had been together for 4 years, engaged for 7 months, living in separate apartments in Lower Manhattan, close enough to walk to each other on a Friday night. Far enough to still have real lives of our own. That's the setup. That's everything you need. We met through mutual friends at a gallery opening in Soho. I wasn't supposed to be there. My buddy Kingsford had dragged me out on a Thursday evening, promising it would be worth my time, which was his consistent way of saying he needed a wingman and lacked the self-awareness to admit it directly. I walked in prepared to stand near a wall and count down the minutes. But then I saw her. She was standing near the far end of the gallery, in front of a large painting of the Brooklyn Bridge at midnight, all deep blue and amber reflections. One of those pieces that makes you feel the cold, even indoors. And she was just looking at it. Not checking her phone. Not scanning the room for people she should be talking to. Just actually standing there, looking at the painting, the way you're technically supposed to look at paintings, but almost no one does. I don't know why that detail got me. Maybe because everyone else in that room was performing, dressed to be seen, laughing to be heard. And she was just present. I walked over, said something embarrassingly obvious about the color palette. She turned, looked at me with a kind of amused patience, and gave me a response that was sharper and funnier than I deserved for the opener I'd given her. I laughed. We talked for 2 hours. I got her number. I called her 2 days later, not a text, an actual call, and she picked up on the second ring. That was how it started. The first 2 years were good in a way that felt real. Not the performed good of 2 people pretending. Genuinely, quietly, solidly good. Serafina was sharp and creative and funny in this dry, low-key way that rewarded you for paying attention. She had this ability to make an ordinary Tuesday feel like it had weight. We'd get Thai takeout and sit on her fire escape and talk for hours about her work as a graphic designer, about my career in architecture, about the cities we wanted to visit, about the kind of life we imagined building. She talked about the future with this open, unhurried excitement, like it was a place we were already walking toward, together, at a comfortable pace. I believed her. Fully. Without question. Year 3 is when the texture started to change. Looking back now, the signals were everywhere. At the time, I explained every one of them away. She changed jobs, left a mid-sized firm she'd been at for 2 years to go fully freelance. I told myself that transition was stressful. I told myself the distance I started to feel was her recalibrating to a new professional reality. I told myself that when she came home at night, buzzing with an energy she hadn't had around me in months, it was because she'd finally found work that lit her up. I was right about the energy. I was wrong about the source. She started going out more. New circles, she said. People from the design world, she said. She'd be out until midnight, sometimes later, and when she came back to her apartment, she'd be laughing at something on her phone, and then quiet with me, like she'd spent all of herself somewhere else and had only the polite remainder left for me. I brought it up once. I said, "You seem different lately. Not bad, just different." She said, "I'm just finally finding my people." She said it so lightly, so offhandedly, and I smiled and nodded and told myself that was a good thing. That was the mistake. Not because finding your people is wrong. It isn't. But because I didn't ask the follow-up question. I didn't say, who specifically? I didn't say, how come I'm not included? I let it go. She let me let it go. And neither of us said anything about the gap that had been quietly widening between us for months. Then, in March of our 4th year, I proposed. We were walking the High Line on a late afternoon in early spring, that particular golden hour when the light off the Hudson turns everything soft and amber. I had the ring in my jacket pocket for 3 weeks. I'd had a whole dinner planned, a reservation at a spot she'd mentioned once, in passing, that she'd always wanted to try. She thought I hadn't been listening that night. I always listened. But in that moment, walking along the elevated park, she said something offhand. She said, "God, I love this city. I feel like I could literally do anything here." And I just knew. I stopped walking. I reached into my pocket. She turned and looked at me, confused, and then she saw the ring, and her hands came up to her face. She cried. Not delicate movie tears. Actual crying, the kind that takes over your whole face. She said yes. She held my face in both her hands and said, "You're my person. You know that, right?" I said I knew. I meant it. And I believe she meant it too. In that moment, standing on that overpass with the city sprawling beneath us, I believe she felt it completely. But feelings are not the same as commitments, and intentions are not the same as follow-through. The engagement was beautiful at first. Her friends were thrilled. My family was emotional and warm. Kingsford threw me a party in his apartment in Bushwick that got mildly out of hand in the best possible way. We started planning. Venue, catering, guest lists, photography. But somewhere in those 7 months, somewhere between the first meeting with the venue coordinator and the 4th conversation about the seating chart, she started disappearing again. Not physically, but emotionally. She began to feel like someone who was present in the room, but absent in the room. Do you know that feeling? Talking to someone and sensing they're thinking about something, someone else? And then there was a name that started appearing. Torrance. Casually at first. Torrance had this interesting take on the pitch I'm working on. I grabbed coffee with Torrance to go over a concept. It was helpful. Oh, Torrance was at that thing last night too. I heard the name. I cataloged it. And I said nothing. Because I told myself I trusted her. Because I told myself that raising it would make me the jealous, insecure fiancé. Because some part of me already knew that if I pulled that thread, I would unravel something I wasn't ready to look at yet. So I smiled. I helped select the floral arrangements. I told her the centerpiece options looked great. I pretended the distance between us was just wedding stress. Until the Tuesday night in November when she asked me to dinner. She picked the restaurant. She picked the night. A Tuesday, which was unusual enough that I noticed it, but not unusual enough that I said anything about it. She picked a quiet Italian place in the West Village where the lighting was low and the tables were far enough apart that conversation stayed contained. I wore the gray jacket she had once said suited me. I made the reservation for 7:30. I got there first, ordered water, and was looking at the menu when she arrived. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. But there was something precise about the way she was put together that night. Intentional in a way that felt like armor rather than adornment. We ordered. We talked about small things for the first 10 minutes. Her Malbec was barely touched. And then she set her hands flat on the table and said, "I think I want to explore other options before settling down." I heard every word with crystalline clarity. I felt the floor beneath me not disappear, but subtly, definitively, shift. I set my fork down. "What does that mean?" I asked. My voice was even. "I don't know how my voice was even," she said. "I just feel like I haven't really experienced everything I want to experience. I don't know if I should be walking into forever without knowing what else is out there." There was that word again. Options. Out there. Like I was a floor plan she was considering while secretly already in love with a different property. I looked at her for a long moment. "Are you in love with someone else?" I asked. She didn't say no. She looked at her plate. She said, "This isn't about that." But she didn't say no. And something quiet and permanent moved inside me. Not rage. Not tears. Just a door, slowly, deliberately closing. I picked my fork back up. I finished my meal. I kept the conversation light, talked about a project I'd been working on, asked about her clients. When the check came, I paid it. I walked her to her building. I said, "I hear you. I genuinely hope you find what you're looking for." She blinked. Her brow pulled together slightly. "That's it," she said. There was something in her voice, not relief, not guilt. Surprise. Almost offense. "That's it," I said. I looked at her for one more second. Then I turned and walked back toward the subway. And I did not look back. I went home and I sat in my apartment. Not on the couch. Just inside the door, back against it, standing there in the dark with my jacket still on. Not crying. Not calling anyone. Just standing there, letting the weight of it settle. 20 minutes. Maybe 30. Then I took the jacket off. I hung it up. I opened my laptop. The first email took me 4 minutes to write. Subject line, cancellation request, event name, booking date. I was professional. I explained the event would no longer be taking place. I asked about the refund policy with full knowledge that we were outside the full refund window and would lose the deposit. I accepted that. I hit send. I moved to the next tab. The caterer. The florist. The band. A jazz quartet Serafina had found through a friend and insisted would set exactly the right tone for the reception. I called each one the following morning. My calls were short, professional, gracious. Every single person said some version of, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Is everything okay?" Each time I said yes. Thank you. Because in the strangest, most specific way, it was. The venue coordinator was the hardest call, not emotionally, but logistically. She had put significant work into the planning. I thanked her genuinely, and she said something I've thought about since. She said, "I've done this long enough to know that when people cancel this early, it almost always ends up being the right call." I thanked her again, and I moved on. I called the photographer, a studio called Elwood Photography that Serafina had researched obsessively, whose portfolio she had described as exactly the vibe we're going for. I left a voicemail. She called back within the hour. I gave her the same message. She was kind. The last call I made was to close the joint savings account. I transferred my half back into my personal account. The banker on the phone said, "Just you today?" When I explained the nature of the call. "Just me," I said. My mother called me the next day. I don't know how she knew. I hadn't told her yet. She just called. And when I told her, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. And then she said, very quietly, "Come for dinner Sunday." Not, "What happened?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, I never trusted her anyway. Just, "Come for dinner Sunday." That was my mother handling it. And it was exactly right. I called Kingsford that night. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. Then, what are you going to do?" I said, "I already did it." Another silence. Then, "You good?" I sat with that honestly. "I will be," I said. And I was not performing optimism. I meant it the way you mean something when you say it because you have no other option. You will be, because the alternative is to stop moving, and stopping is not something you get to do. I did not call her. Not that night. Not the next day. Not at the end of the first week, when the silence between us should have felt unbearable. I did not text. I did not show up outside her building to have the real conversation. I did not reach out asking for closure or clarity or one more chance to understand. I gave her absolutely nothing to work with. I think she had expected at least one moment where I broke. One 2 a.m. call that would tell her she still mattered. One long message that would confirm I was still grieving her. She didn't get that. What she got was silence. And silence, when you are waiting for someone to chase you, is its own kind of answer. I found out later, through Kingsford, who is constitutionally incapable of keeping things entirely to himself, that Serafina had reached out to him within the first 2 weeks. She asked if I was okay. He said yes. She asked if I was angry. He said no. She asked if I had said anything about her. He told me she'd asked that, and when he did, I understood exactly what she was doing. She was listening for her name in my mouth. She was checking whether the door was still hanging open. It wasn't. 3 weeks after the restaurant, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove upstate. I had signed up for a weekend architecture workshop in the Hudson Valley, a 2-day intensive focused on adaptive reuse design, something I'd been meaning to do for almost 4 years and had always deprioritized. There had always been something else. A dinner we'd planned, an event on the shared calendar, a reason to stay. This time there was nothing on the calendar. There was just an open weekend and a road I hadn't driven in too long. The workshop was held at a converted barn property 45 minutes outside of Kingston. Wide planked floors, original timber beams, drafting tables set up in rows with good light from the north-facing windows. There were 14 people in the room when I arrived. I chose a seat near the windows. The instructor had just started going through the introductory material when the door at the back opened and someone came in 5 minutes late, slightly out of breath, carrying more bags than was practical, apologizing under her breath before she'd even made eye contact with anyone. She sat down at the empty seat next to mine. She set her bag on the table. The pencil case at the top of it was not fully closed, and when she pulled the bag toward her, it rolled off the edge and exploded across the hardwood floor, pins scattering in every direction. I got down without thinking and helped gather them. She was already crouching across from me, collecting pins with a look on her face that was embarrassed but not destroyed by it. When we straightened back up, she said, "Great first impression, right?" I said, "Honestly, I thought it was memorable." She laughed, a short, genuine sound, and turned toward the instructor. Her name was OnDealing. She worked in urban planning for the city. She was based in Brooklyn. She had come to the workshop on a colleague's recommendation after a dinner conversation about whether old industrial buildings should be adapted or protected as is. We talked through breaks. We sat near each other through the afternoon session and most of Saturday. Not flirtatiously, just easily. She was direct without being blunt. She was curious without being performative. She disagreed with one of the guest speakers on a specific point about load-bearing wall adaptations and made her case clearly, without apology, and without softening it just because the speaker had credentials. I found that interesting. When the workshop ended Sunday afternoon, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee before driving back to the city. I said yes. We sat in a small cafe on the main street for 2 hours. The conversation moved through architecture and urban planning and into smaller things, neighborhoods we loved, the strange way light changes between boroughs, a restaurant she'd been meaning to try, a building I'd worked on that she'd walked past without knowing. She listened when I spoke with the kind of attention that meant she was actually processing, not just waiting for her turn. I noticed that. I wasn't looking for anything, but I noticed. The months that followed the restaurant were quieter than I expected. Not empty, quieter. I worked more than I had in 2 years. I ran 6 days a week, not out of discipline but out of necessity, because moving made the stillness afterward feel earned rather than hollow. I took a freelance residential project I'd been putting off, a full redesign for a client in the West Village, and gave it everything. Late nights with blueprints spread across the dining table. Revision after revision until the floor plan actually felt right. I started cooking again, real cooking, not just reheating things. Saturday mornings with actual grocery lists. Meals that took more than 20 minutes to make. It sounds small. It wasn't small. Kingsford noticed something in the way I was moving through those months. He didn't say anything specific at first, but one evening over drinks about 6 weeks in, he looked at me across the bar and said, "You seem different." "Different how?" I asked. He thought about it. "Like you stopped waiting for something," he said. That landed. Because he was right. I had spent the better part of the last year waiting for Serafina to come back from wherever she'd gone emotionally, waiting for the warmth to return, waiting for the distance to close, waiting for the version of her that had held my face and said, "You're my person," to reappear. When she said what she said at that restaurant, something specific had ended. Not just the engagement, the waiting. And without the waiting taking up all that space, I had room to actually live. I saw OnDealing again about 6 weeks after the workshop. She texted out of nowhere. She'd been at an exhibit in the meatpacking district, and something she'd seen had reminded her of a comment I'd made during the workshop about the way industrial-era brickwork holds texture differently than modern masonry. She said, "Thought of something you said today. You were right." I asked her to elaborate. She sent pictures. We went back and forth for over an hour. Then she said, "We should actually go look at some of these buildings together sometime." I said, "We should." It started that way. Slow walks through Gowanus and Red Hook, looking at buildings the way some people look at paintings. Coffee that turned into long meals. A dinner in Greenpoint that started at 7 and somehow ended at 11, neither of us having noticed the hours passing. I told her about Serafina eventually, not as a warning, not as a disclaimer, not as a way to manage her expectations, just as context. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "That sounds like it hurt." I said, "It did." She nodded. She said, "And now?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "Now it mostly just feels like clarity," I said. She looked at me. "That's actually a healthy place to land," she said. And I thought, yes, I think it is. Around the 4-month mark, Kingsford called on a Tuesday evening with his particular tone of voice, the one that means he has information he feels obligated to share, but isn't sure he should. "Heads up," he said. I asked what kind of heads up. He paused. "Serafina's been posting. You know, the kind of stuff people post when they want to be seen." "What kind of stuff?" I asked. "Discovery of self content. Finding my true self captions. Late night city photos. That kind of thing." I said, "Okay." He said, "You're not going to look?" I said, "No." He hesitated. "She's been going out a lot. I think she and Torrance." "Kingsford," I said. He stopped. "I genuinely don't need to know," I said. He was quiet for a second. "Okay," he said. I meant it. Not because it didn't land somewhere below the surface. It did. But because what Serafina was doing with her choices was no longer my information to carry. She had opened a door. I had walked through it. We were on different sides now, and what happened on her side was not my business, and it would not serve me to make it my business. I was done carrying weight that didn't belong to me. Here's what I put together much later. Pieced from things Kingsford told me in parts, from things mutual friends let slip in the careless way people sometimes do, and from a direct conversation with Serafina's former roommate, Lysandra, who had a complicated relationship with loyalty on this particular topic because she had watched the whole thing unfold from inside the apartment and had never quite forgiven Serafina for how she handled it. Torrance was not a colleague the way colleagues typically are. He wasn't a professional contact who occasionally grabbed coffee to talk through project ideas. He and Serafina had been building something over months, something that didn't have a clear label yet, but had the weight and gravity of one. Not physical, as far as anyone knew, but emotional, which, in some ways, runs deeper. They talked constantly. He listened to her in a way that felt revelatory to her. He reflected things back to her about herself that she had never articulated before. He made her feel known in a very specific, electric way that she had started to confuse with love. What she didn't understand, what a lot of people don't understand until it's too late, is that being known by someone is not the same as being chosen by them. Being fascinating to someone is not the same as being valued. Lysandra told me that in the weeks leading up to that dinner, Serafina had talked about the situation constantly. She was conflicted, she said. She didn't want to hurt anyone. But she had convinced herself that what she was feeling was something she owed herself, that if she didn't pursue it, she would spend her entire life wondering. She had not accounted for one critical variable. Torrance was not interested in being the answer. He had been interested in the dynamic she offered him, her attention, her admiration, the particular kind of emotional intimacy that becomes available when someone is in a committed relationship, but emotionally leaning toward you. That was the thing he wanted. Not a relationship. Not responsibility. Not the weight of someone's future. The attention. When Serafina actually became available, when she had dismantled the engagement and the weight of that decision was sitting fully on her, he withdrew. Slowly at first. Then much more quickly. He met someone at a design conference 2 months later. By month 3, he had stopped responding to her messages with any consistency. And Serafina was left standing in a life she had deliberately pulled apart, looking at the space where a future used to be, trying to understand how she had miscalculated so completely. She texted me at 10:47 on a Thursday night. I remember the time because I was still at my drafting table, reviewing a revised blueprint, and my phone lit up on the desk beside me. "Hey, I know this is out of nowhere. I've been thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at it. I picked the phone up. I set it back down. I went back to the blueprint. In the morning, I looked at the message again. I thought about what response, if any, actually served either of us. I wrote back, "I'm well. Take care of yourself." She replied within 4 minutes. "Can we talk?" Properly, I mean. I didn't respond to that. Not because I was calculating it, but because I genuinely had nothing to say that would be useful. She had made her choice. I had made mine. The conversation between us was finished. OnDealing and I had become something real by then. Quietly. Without announcement. Just real. She was not a rebound. I need to be precise about that, because people assume the timeline makes it one. She wasn't. If anything, being around OnDealing had shown me, by contrast, exactly what I had been doing in the last year of my engagement. I had been working, not in the productive sense, in the holding it together sense. I had been filling gaps and reassuring and adjusting and overlooking and smoothing over. I had been maintaining something instead of building something. With OnDealing, the ratio was completely different. There was no maintenance tax. It just moved. She challenged me on ideas the way you challenge someone when you respect their intelligence and want them to be sharper. She told me when she thought I was wrong without softening it into meaninglessness. She showed up, not when it was convenient, but consistently. She came to my mother's for Sunday dinner about 5 months in. My mother made pot roast. OnDealing ate 2 full helpings and asked for the recipe. My mother liked her immediately, not in a polite, performing way, but genuinely. I watched them in the kitchen afterward, OnDealing asking follow-up questions about the seasoning, my mother talking with her hands the way she does when she's comfortable, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Ease. Real ease. Not relief that a performance was going well. Just ease. Serafina sent another message 2 weeks after the first. Longer this time. She had thought about what to say. It read, "I know I don't deserve this conversation. I know I gave up the right to ask anything of you. But I need you to hear me, even if nothing comes of it. I think I made a serious mistake. A real one. I've had time to think, a lot of time, and I miss what we had. I miss us. I know that isn't fair to say. I know the timing is everything, and I've wasted mine. I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was. I just need to know if there's any part of you that thinks there might be a chance." I read it twice. I sat with it for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt reading that. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something more like a quiet, low-grade grief. For her. For the version of us that had walked the high line that afternoon in March. For the future we had started building that she had made the decision to dismantle. The grief was real. But grief is not a reason to reopen a door. And missing something is not the same as deserving it back. And here is what I kept coming back to. She had not said she was confused when she sat across from me that night. She had not said she was scared. She had not said she needed space to think. She had said she wanted to explore other options before settling down. As if the 4 years, the ring, the $18,000, the venue deposit, and my mother's tears in a fitting room were an option she was weighing against other options. She wanted to explore. She explored. And now she was standing in the field she had chosen, finding it emptier than she had imagined, looking back at the door she had walked out through. The door was closed. Not slammed. Not locked in bitterness. Just closed. Quietly, cleanly, with intention, and on the other side of it, something new had been built. Something with no vacancy for what she was looking for. I wrote back. I took my time. I did not rush it. I said, "Serafina, I appreciate that you reached out, and I can see this comes from a genuine place, so I'm going to be honest with you in return. I'm not available in the way you're hoping. I've moved on, not out of anger, not as a statement, but because what you said last November made clear that moving on was the right thing for both of us. I don't have any bitterness toward you. I genuinely hope you find what you were looking for, but what we had is not something I'm willing to revisit. I mean that with full respect. Take care of yourself." I read it once. I sent it. I closed the app. I walked into the kitchen and started making dinner. Mutual friends found their way to me over the following weeks. Some were diplomatic. Most meant well. One woman from Serafina's circle, someone I'd always found generously well-intentioned in a slightly exhausting way, messaged me to say she wasn't trying to get involved, but wanted me to know that Serafina was really going through it, and talked about me often. I responded that I appreciated her saying so and hoped Serafina was getting good support around her. Then I muted the thread. Bramwell called me directly. He'd known both of us for years, predating the relationship, and had the rare quality of actually meaning what he said. "She wants you back," he said. No preamble. "I know," I said. And I'm good," I said. He laughed, not mockingly, not performatively. The real version. Good, he said. You deserve good. Lysandra told me this part weeks later, and I include it not because I needed it for my own closure. I already had that, but because it completes the story. Serafina found out about OnDealing through a mutual social media. Nothing dramatic. A group photo from a dinner in Williamsburg, several people, casual setting, mid-evening. OnDealing happened to be standing next to me. We were both mid-laugh at something happening off-frame. It was an ordinary photograph. It was nothing, except it said everything. Because it wasn't the photo of a man who was broken. It wasn't the photo of someone rebuilding with visible scaffolding, performing recovery for an audience. It was just someone who had continued, who had walked forward naturally, who had not left a candle in the window. And that, Lysandra told me, was when it hit her. Not that she had lost me. She had understood that intellectually for a while, but that she had fundamentally overestimated her position. She had assumed that when she was ready, when the Torrance thing had run its course and she had done her exploring and was standing in the open field of her freedom and found it colder than expected, I would still be in the place she'd left me. She had imagined the door cracked. An implicit, when you're ready, I'll still be here. She hadn't gotten that. She had gotten a man who heard what she said, believed her, and built something complete and real on the other side of it. Something with no room for a ghost. OnDealing and I have been together for just over a year now. We don't perform it. We don't curate it. We live it. She moved into my apartment 4 months ago, not because of pressure or milestones, but because she was already there most nights and the commute from her place to mine had become a formality. The first night she officially moved in, we ate Thai food on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and had a long, cheerful argument about where the bookshelf belonged. It was ordinary, completely, unremarkably ordinary, and it was the most at ease I had felt in years. My mother calls her the good one, not in comparison, just the way you describe something that is simply, genuinely, the right thing. Kingsford brings up the restaurant night sometimes. He says he would have completely lost his mind in my position. I tell him I nearly did, just not the way Serafina expected. The way I nearly lost my mind was privately. Sitting in my car outside my apartment building for 20 minutes that night with the engine off, both hands on the wheel, staring at the middle distance while the city moved around me. Not screaming, not texting anyone, just sitting inside it, letting it be real. And then I went upstairs, and I opened my laptop, and I wrote the first email, and I kept going, one step, then the next, not heroically, not with some plan, just forward, because forward was the only direction that made any sense. One last thing. This came through Kingsford, who heard it through channels that made it third-hand at best. So I hold it loosely. But apparently, in the weeks after my final message to Serafina, the one where I told her the door was closed, she had a long conversation with a close friend. And in that conversation, she apparently said, I thought he would fight. I really thought he would fight. I've thought about that line more than I expected to. Not with satisfaction, I want to be clear about that. With something more like recognition. Because that line tells you everything about what she had understood our relationship to be. She had mistaken my love for need. She had confused my depth of commitment with a bottomless capacity to absorb loss and still hold on. She had calculated that a man who cared as much as I did would never actually let go. That the love was the leverage, and the leverage meant she could leave and still come back. What she hadn't accounted for was this. The same depth of feeling that makes someone love fully also makes them capable of closing that love off completely. When it's clear the love is not being treated as the gift it is. When it's clear the other person has made their choice with open eyes and a prepared speech. When someone tells you, calmly, over lamb chops and candlelight, that they want to explore other options. The most loving and dignified thing you can do is believe them. Entirely. Without negotiating. Without leaving a light on. Without leaving any door open. I don't hate Serafina. I want to say that plainly, because this kind of story can read like it's building toward contempt, and it isn't. She is someone I loved genuinely for a long time. She is someone who got afraid, of commitment, of forever, of the particular terror of choosing one life when you can still imagine others. That fear is human. People feel that. People make decisions from inside that fear and call it instinct, and spend years either justifying it or regretting it, depending on how things unfold. I don't hold that against her. What I know about myself, what those months after the restaurant taught me in the clearest possible terms, is that I am not built to wait in a holding pattern for someone who has already told me they want to leave. I am not built to hold a door open with one hand while trying to build something real with the other. She got what she asked for. Complete freedom. No conditions. No guilt. No thread to pull her back. I stepped out of the way entirely. And in doing so, I cleared the space I'd been taking up in her story, and she cleared the space she'd been taking up in mine. OnDealing doesn't need the archaeology of my past to trust what we have. She knows the outline. She knows I was engaged, that it ended, that I took time before I was ready. She knows I'm here now. Fully. That's enough. More than enough. Kingsford asked me a few weeks ago, over drinks on a Friday, the way these conversations always happen, whether I ever wondered how it would have gone if I had fought, if I'd done what Serafina had expected, if I'd shown up outside her building, or called at midnight, or sent the message that said I couldn't walk away. I thought about it honestly before I answered. Yeah, I said. I think we'd probably still be together. He raised an eyebrow. And I took a drink. And I'd be miserable, I said. Slowly, quietly. The way people are miserable when they've won something they should have let go, when they're holding a thing so tightly they can't feel anything else. He nodded. He got it. Some things are not worth winning. Some fights are losses in disguise. And some silences, the ones you walk into deliberately, cleanly, without looking back, are the loudest, most honest things you will ever say. She wanted to explore her options, so I became one she could no longer choose.